Hello, welcome back to another episode of NCAA game breakdowns. This week we're actually going to look at two games. We have Duke versus Penn on Friday night. Number one goes down for the second week in a row. And then on the weekend, Hopkins takes down Virginia, who would have been the presumptive number one on Monday had they made it through the weekend. Lots of upsets so far. Obviously, people deciding who they want to have as their number one team this week, split between Army and Denver for most folks. Notre Dame, Duke, Virginia all losing, Maryland losing as well to Notre Dame. And, there's just seems like there's just more good teams than ever. There's a bunch of teams at the top who seem like they could all beat each other. And as we've seen, there's teams who aren't necessarily in that top group for a lot of people like Penn and Georgetown who are capable of beating these top teams. So let's start with Duke versus Penn on Friday night. The biggest story of the game, well, really two of them for me was the failed clears by Duke. Just a lot of mistakes, some sloppy ones. It seemed like they weren't sure which side they were going to start their clear on. Something to watch for a lot of fans is basically every clear in field lacrosse depends on getting the ball to one side of the field or the other. So you move it to one side, you have a certain set of actions, which normally involves stretching one midfielder over the midfield line, some sort of action in the middle, which differs depending on the team. But sometimes when the goalie holds it or when you're kind of in the middle ground, you're not sure which side is pushing and pulling, and you just end up with kind of both of them stagnant, and that seems to be what happened a lot for Duke. They also had some bad luck ones. They slipped in the fourth quarter on a play when they would have had an easy out, and they also had one possession where their long pull was one hand cradling like an attackman who for every long pull ever, aside from Joel White and maybe CJ Costabile, it doesn't end well, and it didn't end well in that scenario. The other story of the game was Carroll, the goalie for Penn, 17 saves. He was just phenomenal, especially early in the game in transition. Just really held Penn in there, helped them get through a few mistakes, was obviously very good on O'Neal. And, Duke's got some guys who can really sling it, and they have some midfielders who can get after you. And he was really stout. And then the faceoffs, Duke still won the faceoff battle 15-14, so 15-29 for Duke, but they're going to go way higher than that on most teams. We had Jerry Ragnes last week on the YouTube channel talking about faceoffs and talking about how a lot of teams are going to have two different faceoff guys, maybe someone who's more of a clamp guy, someone who's more of a counter guy. Our series seemed like he was getting the clamp as well, but early on it was Eldridge who was starting. He seemed like he wasn't, getting the best results against Naso. So they went to our series. He had immediate positive impact, and they kept those two guys going throughout the game. In a game where there's 29 faceoffs, having two guys running, not the worst idea. Something you see more now than you used to, and in situations like these, it was pretty effective. Okay, I want to talk first about the Duke offense versus the UPenn defense. So there are kind of two stories here. One, Brendan Lavelle for Penn was fantastic on Brendan O'Neal. 1 goal, 0 assists for O'Neal. His 1 goal came in a really nice off-ball play, actually, in the hung situation, just getting open, getting that jump shot off. So hard for goalies to pick that up. But Lavelle did a great job of getting his O'Neal's touches out as far from the goal as possible. Obviously, he has so much range that you really have to push it far out. He feels dangerous at 15, 16 yards. So that means, you got to make him press 25, 30 yards out from the goal if possible. And I think the one thing that Lavelle did really well that is going to be an imperative against O'Neal is he was big enough to kind of hang with him in the cross check. O'Neal is bigger and faster and quicker than most defenders. I think from a defensive point of view, the strength is the most important part. If you're getting bulldoged, you're screwed. At least if he's getting a step on you or he's trying to quick you to death, you can bring help or whatnot. But Lavelle did a great job of staying on the ball and did a great job of fighting through picks as well. He got over a lot of picks, didn't give them a lot of advantages. And then Penn was ready when they did have to switch picks. It wasn't a switch. It was a hard chip by the short sticks to basically stop O'Neal's momentum, or at least do as good of a job as you can. Let Lavelle get back to the ball, and then they're prepared to rotate behind the ball while they had briefly two guys on O'Neal. I think when Duke watches the film back, they'll probably realize they left some offense on the field by not beating those rotations maybe a little bit quicker. On that note, this Duke offense is insanely talented. The broadcast was talking about it, rightfully so. Dyson is obviously an incredible player. O'Neal was the best player in the country last year, and Zawada is a name that probably hasn't got enough credit the last couple of years. If there's one thing that you kind of nitpick, it's a lot of play above the goal. Obviously, Zawada is kind of playing the X position. He's very talented back there. I think altogether, he probably would rather spend more time above the goal than behind. O'Neal, obviously. O'Neal is primarily an above the goal player, which, is fine. The one thing that's hard about dodging from the midfield is it's a little bit easier to slide to. And I think Penn was ready to go to slide more than maybe other teams want to be now. I think maybe that briefly caught the Duke offense off guard. They're not maybe used to teams sliding that aggressively. And then also, it does leave you a little bit more susceptible to big goalie days. When the goaltenders can lock into you and see you the whole way, it just seems like they're more effective. And when you are running more offense from behind the goal, you have these up to hash shots, which goalies just seem to have a harder time with. And then you have passes from behind to step downs, which is really the most efficient way to score goals in lacrosse, feeding from X to guys who can hammer it. And they're good shots. And the goaltenders have to go from looking basically directly behind them to trying to pick up shots in a short period of time. Duke's got a ton of talented players, but two guys, I think Balsamo and Slusher, could give them some behind the goal presence, even if it's just with the second unit. They have a lot of guys who are great dodgers from up top. Curious if you're going to see more invert type work from them, because they have notably less of that than a lot of the other teams that we're seeing. And it does maybe lead to days like this when the goalie gets hot. It's tough to just dodge down the alley and shoot. Now, Denenza gets 4 in the fourth. McAdory was outstanding in this game as well. He's just such a dynamic player. It's possible. I'm not saying that midfield dodging doesn't work anymore. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying it was a lot of the same look for Duke. And I think it is more likely to lead to big goalie days than maybe play from behind the net. I think we're still learning about that a little bit. I think Duke, when they watched this game back as well, they were a little sloppy in transition, especially early. A lot of good looks that they didn't cash. Some obviously very good saves in there as well. Some shots from the defensive personnel that could have gone in. Zawada had a couple good looks in transition. They're going to score those. I don't think anyone is super worried about Duke. This was a weird game with the weather and the wet field and the failed clears and all that. But they were a little bit sloppy in transition. And then wanted to make 2 more points on this. So the Penn D middies are very good, and they also have a lot of guys who play defense for them and offense. They have these two-way guys. One of them is number 14, Chris Kinnett for Penn. And there's one play that led to a goal where that just kind of illustrates one of the maybe unseen ways that having guys playing both ways is really helpful. So Duke barely clears the ball, as was obviously the story, like I talked about. They get the ball over the midfield line with about 60 seconds left. And then, as most teams do, they run a sub pick. So they're setting a pick with their defensive midi on the ball to try to get the other team's offensive midi either stuck on defense or more likely just a few steps behind his man running to the midfield line to get an advantage. The problem for Duke was that Kinnett just switched into the ball and guarded the ball and wasn't trying to get off at all. He's used to playing defense. The plan was for him, at least it seemed like, to play defense, and he's not a liability back there. So it's not like getting an midi stuck where it's, okay, you can kind of draw this guy out and go after him. He's a good player. He knows what he's doing. But what it did was it wasted 25 seconds of offense for Duke, where they were preoccupied with getting this sub matchup, which, again, is a perfectly logical thing to do. All the good teams do it. And then they just didn't get anything out of it. So then now they're playing 33 seconds of offense with McAdory initiating, and it's tough against good teams to generate offense quickly. There's a reason why you work late in the shot clock, because that's when teams get tired and they make mistakes, and you can get goals. So, and then when Penn got a save, up and out to Kinnett, who is a guy who's capable of playing offense, leading the break, and they end up scoring in transition. It was just a really important sequence for Penn that led to a goal. Obviously, included a big stop defensively, and credit to Kinnett too. He put offense, defense, and then had enough juice to get out the top and lead the break. And also in doing that, the Duke middies are trying to get off the field, so it just kind of hammers home that advantage for Penn of having these guys who can play two ways. There's a bunch of guys around the country who are doing it. Brian Tevlin at Notre Dame last year is a good example. Very difficult to do, but if you have guys who can do it and you use them well, it's a nice advantage. Then want to just mention something I thought was interesting on the Duke man up. Penn shut McAdory on the man up. They shut him off. I thought that was interesting. Now, I want to be very kind of careful here. Maybe Penn just thought McAdory was the most dangerous player on the man up. He's arguably the best feeder on the team. Zawada, I think, is a pretty good feeder as well. But you would expect, at least most people would expect, O'Neal to get the shut. And I just think it's interesting that, if you're Duke game planning, you're probably talking about what we want to do and then what to do if we get a shut. You're logically thinking that the shut's going to go to O'Neal. And then, so you probably have a plan for that. But all man up plays usually involve all six players. So it's equally disruptive to shut any of the players. So shutting McAdory, kind of gave them a little bit of a pause. I don't even remember if they scored on that man up or not. I just thought that was interesting to kind of shut, not a random player, because again, McAdory might be the most dangerous player on man up, but you would certainly expect it to be O'Neal shutting someone other than him. Kind of an interesting wrinkle by Penn. And then switching sides of the field, the Penn offense versus the Duke defense. It was really transition defense and failed clears was the story for Duke. A couple man up goals as well, but 6-on-6, Duke was stout. I thought Jamison was solid in the net. Probably has something, a few things to learn in the clear game, as most freshmen do, let alone freshman goaltenders who have a big part in the clear. But in the cage, he was solid, kept a minute late, made some big saves. A lot of the goals were unsettled situations, not necessarily easy saves. Penn's got some guys who maybe aren't the biggest players in the world, but they can really sling it. Ben Smith, among others, very talented, very crafty shooters. So I thought Jamison was pretty good. The Penn offense, I think the ball movement was very good. They ran a weave action up top, similar to what Syracuse is doing, that I thought was interesting, where they have three high middies. They would set a pick for one of them in the high wing on one side, and the third guy was basically on the boundary line on the other side of the field. So when they would sweep. When they realized they wouldn't have anything, they would throw a long pass to the boundary and then come right back at the defense. It was a good way of really getting those Duke short sticks in space. Those guys are pretty good, though. They really didn't get beat very often. And, credit to Penn for continuing to play hard and keep the ball moving, even when they weren't drawing slides and whatnot. Not always the easiest thing to do. And then the second half, Penn, a lot of single invert, a lot of big little. That's probably what I would do as well against a team that guards the ball very well. At least if you win matchups back there, you can lead to goals a lot quicker, and it's also a little less risky from a turnover standpoint. If you're going to turn it over, behind the net is the best place to do it. So that's, the majority of my notes on Duke versus Penn. A big win for the Quakers, big win for the Ivy League. Hasn't necessarily been the greatest start to the year for the Ivy. A couple big wins this past weekend over the Big Ten and the ACC, which are really going to help come playoff time. And the story of this one was clears, faceoffs, and saves. There's all of this. There are a lot of things to analyze in a lacrosse game. All sports are just numbers of numbers game. How do you get more possessions, and how do you give yourself more chances to score a goal? Well, clears, faceoffs, and saves are the way to do it. Penn won all three of those phases, or if they didn't win, they performed much better than the average fan probably thought they would, and it was a big part of the game. Switching over to Hopkins UVA, you kind of want to make a general point here about the two games. The broadcast in the Duke game was pretty clear that the Duke rope unit is the best in the country. They might be, but there's a lot of really good rope units. I think the quality of the defensive midfield play around the country is absurd. It's better than it's ever been. It's influencing the way the game is played, with teams leaving their short sticks on islands. And I feel like, this is anecdotal, but I feel like short sticks are winning more of those matchups than they used to. And I think Hopkins kids are pretty good. I think Virginia's guys are very good. Notre Dame's guys are very good. Dylan Hess at Georgetown went toe-to-toe with Eric Dobson, who's going to be a first-team All-American this year last week. So there's a lot of really good short sticks. Duke's guys might be the best, but it's a complicated question, and I think there's more talent at that position than anyone maybe realizes, and it's going to be a battle for the All American spots, and ultimately for who can produce from the midfield come tournament time. So switching to Hopkins UVA, some similarities between these two games. One being, goaltending was the difference. Chayse Ierlan is a friend of mine. Played with him at Cornell. He's an outstanding player, outstanding goalie, great person as well. He was outstanding in this game, especially in the second half. 5 saves in the third quarter, 4 in the fourth quarter. He was the kind of the difference in the second half. And Hopkins clearly had the game plan to play inside out defensively, give up some outside shots. That sounds like a good idea, and it really was. But Virginia's got some kids who can really sling it out there, and they scored some in the second half, in the first half, and in the second half, Chayse really stood tall in there and made some big saves, and the degree of difficulty on his saves, I thought was impressive. And when you add in the fact that there's both goalies got shelled a little bit in the first half, it's impressive, although unsurprising, as Quint said on the broadcast, given how much experience Chayse has, that he was able to right the ship and really was the difference in this game for Hopkins. The next biggest story was unassisted goals for Hopkins. Collison had 4 goals, 1 assist, as did Peshko. Both those guys went to my high school, so I'm just really proud of them performing at the highest level, and they were really important in this game. Collison, 3 of his goals were unassisted. Peshko had an unassisted goal. Grimes had an unassisted goal. This Virginia team is going to really make you earn those unassisted goals, and Hopkins did. A lot of teams won't be able to this year, and that was ultimately why they had success. Game was just crazy, super fun. I thought the broadcast was actually pretty solid. Just conveying the excitement of the game. Lots of good short stick play, as I said, and then some insane shooting. Chauvet's goal from basically the restraining line was badass. Schutz, he's been primarily kind of the party starter, hockey assist guy for them this year. I'm sure it was nice for him to get his hands free a couple times and let it fly, and he can really hammer it. And then Grimes, Degnan, Collison, these guys for Hopkins can really shoot with range, which was important. And then face-off goals both ways. This is something that is a staple of Virginia lacrosse, scoring off the face-off, scoring in all possessions, really. But Hopkins was able to generate offense, including at least 1 goal and several other good offensive plays off of transition and face-offs, especially kind of gave Virginia a little bit of a taste of their own medicine. It was weird to see a team running on Virginia at Klockner. Teams have certainly won there before, but usually it's by dictating a certain style of lacrosse. Hopkins, in some ways, beat Virginia at their own game in terms of getting up and down the field and scoring in transition. So transitioning to the Virginia O versus Hopkins defense, like I said, clear that Hopkins wanted to play inside out, try to limit dunks on the crease. I think Cormier is the guy, obviously, you got to find there. Peyton still had a big day, 2-2, including a really nice twister in the first quarter. But ultimately, Hopkins clearly wanted to limit paint touches, so to speak, for Virginia. I thought that game plan worked very well, especially when Chayse started to heat up. When you do that, you're going to give up overpasses and skip passes, and Schellenberger found a bunch of those, especially to Schutz, 2 in a row, one where Schutz caught it and let it fly righty, and then a nice kind of split dodge back to the middle of the field for a lefty finish. Showed some nice skill on that play. Schellenberger's tough because he goes from so many places. He obviously does a lot of work coming up from X, and then he did a lot of work in this game in the high wing. Sometimes he'll be the pop guy in the high wing, so he won't even be carrying it. He'll be kind of the mirror guy, which is hard because that forces you to make certain decisions about where and when you're going to slide. Smith, I thought, did a pretty good job on Schellenberger all day. He just scores in so many different scenarios and ways, and Schellenberger is one of the best players in the country for a reason. He's tough, he's aggressive, he can shoot it, and what was impressive in this game was his ability to feed left-handed back through the defense, so dodging from the high wing, going down the lefty alley, and his ability to find inside cutters and skip shooters as a lefty. When you have a guy doing that, there's not a whole lot you can do with him. thought Hopkins did as good of a job as you probably can. And then the big advantage for Hopkins was number 6, Quentin Kilrain on McCabe Millen. Kilrain's a lefty. That seemed to really help Hopkins. They were able to force McCabe to his left hand, and maybe didn't step into some of those left-handed shots like he probably will in the future. I think it was a little bit noticeable in the game that he didn't want to lean into the left hand, and Hopkins had a lot of success of getting him up the hash to his left hand and then trying to push him, outside of the dangerous areas. The kid's a freshman. He's going to figure it out. We've all seen him sling it with both hands. I think that's coming. But Kilrain had obviously a great day. And then Hopkins did a good job in pick play behind the net. I'm really just trying to keep matchups. Kilrain was basically on McCabe the whole game. Couldn't necessarily find short sticks for Millen to get after. And Kilrain just did a great job. I think it illustrates kind of a broader point where a lot of the good teams, everyone's got a really dynamic dodger and a very good cover guy. It's the teams who have two who are really going to put pressure on you. So that's why Virginia puts pressure on you because Millen and Schellenberger and Schutz and all these other guys, but those two guys that attack and really break down long poles. Well, in this game, Hopkins had two guys who at least could do their best and do an effective job of disrupting on two great players. And not everyone has a lefty defender, but it seems like, maybe that's a little bit of an advantage for now until he adjusts against Millen, and just credit to Kilrain, who did a nice job. Chayse again was spectacular. And the short sticks I thought were good for Hopkins: 12 Martin, 10 Aviles, and 77 Joronsky. They don't necessarily look like the D-middies from some of the other teams who are just maybe a little bit bigger. But they're all pretty slick and savvy. Aviles had a couple caused turnovers, I think, and just made some big plays. And I thought they were just dialed in off ball and very good on the man down. Joronsky had a nice play on the man down where he was the middle guy, and he took the cutter, and then Virginia ran a double cut play, which is very common against that style of man down defense. And he kind of read it, got to both cutters. That's kind of IQ stuff that's going to be really important later on in the spring. But again, I thought the short stick unit was pretty good. And then they were very good getting in passing lanes in transition as well. The whole Hopkins defense was getting some pickoffs, some one-handed interceptions. They probably had to rely on that stuff a little bit more than they would have liked. But it's still a skill to pick those off, and they made some big plays when they needed it. Again, they maybe got bailed out a little bit by some of those plays, which they will want to correct. But when it's time to get bailed out, you're at least happy that you make the plays. For Virginia, I think the questions are secondary scoring. Only one player outside of the starting lineup scored, and that was Terenzi, the short stick midfielder. So their second line did not score in this game. They really didn't play very much. Colsey, Boyden, and Schutz take the vast majority of the reps for Virginia. Secondary scoring is going to help, especially as the spring goes on. Guys get banged up, and also the weather gets significantly hotter. And then how do you get Millen on some short sticks? Schellenberger does an excellent job at finding short stick matchups off the ball, so it's not always getting picks or whatnot. He runs good off-ball action to get himself covered up by a short stick. I think Millen doing a little bit of that will help him, especially when he's with guys like Kilrain, who are doing a really nice job on the ball. Switching to the Hopkins offense, Virginia makes you earn everything. Like I said, they're really good on the perimeter. Hopkins did a good job to avoid any really dumb plays on the perimeter because, Virginia can really catch you off guard with that because they're in lanes so much quicker and earlier than other teams because all their defenders are like 6'5" to 6'7". So, again, 6 unassisted goals, 5 by the offense, Collison 3, Peshko 1, Grimes 1. That's just really important. And when the chips are down, Collison scored a big goal late, and it was clear Virginia didn't want to go. Again, Virginia doesn't slide. For the most part, they just basically double team the ball when they think they can put it on the ground, but they really make you earn matchups. And Chismar and Terenzi and their other guys are going to win a lot of matchups throughout the spring. And Peshko and Grimes and Collison getting after those guys was important. I think Hopkins will play more guys against other teams in a game like this where you really had to earn your slides. You saw Peshko and Collison especially out there a lot, obviously with the hot hand. Hopkins attack scored 5 goals out of 16 in this game. You're not going to see that very often where a top team scores 16 goals and only 5 of them come from starting attackmen. And I don't think any of them played bad. Degnan had a hat trick. Melendez, I thought, had maybe a couple opportunities to score that were nice saves by Nunes. But other than that, did a nice job of playing his role in the offense. And then Angeles, he puts a lot of pressure on you in the big little, which I thought was important. They kept going to the big little. Wasn't always working, but I think it kept Virginia honest at least and didn't let them totally lock in to these midfield dodges. And Hopkins did a great job of switching sides of the field and also getting the ball above the goal, behind the goal, and then back and forth, above and behind, above and behind. A lot of 5-6 second dodges instead of 15-second dodges, which obviously is important because it doesn't allow Virginia to free slide and keeps the ball moving, keeps everyone engaged, but it also gives you just way more kicks at the can in a possession. It gives you 6, 7, 8 dodges in a possession instead of 3 or 4. And against a team where you really have to earn them, you'll take all the lottery tickets you can get. On that note, the freshman Ayers, number 7 for Hopkins, was back in the big little a lot, doing working hard, trying to set picks for Angeles. They can put pressure on you back there, and they're going to put pressure on teams back there as well. But again, it wasn't that Hopkins attackmen were bad by any means. Those Virginia long poles are just, I think, pretty tough. And it seems like the midfield is going to be the way to get after that team. That's pretty much all I had. Hopkins wins the Doyle Cup. Huge win for them. Obviously, the top 10 now is in flux. Denver has wins over Hopkins and Cornell. Hopkins has just the loss at Denver, but wins over Virginia. Army's beaten Syracuse, Duke, Notre Dame, Virginia have all lost. Maryland lost to Notre Dame. Notre Dame lost to Georgetown. So it's just a really fun season. I don't think that maybe in other years it's like there's no dominant team, but now it's not like there's a lack of good teams. There's so many really good teams. Like the quality of the lacrosse, in my opinion, is just higher than it's ever been. And anyone who says they think they have a very strong feeling about who's going to win the national championship, I think is just a liar at this point, because it seems like there's more teams who could conceivably win it this year than we've seen in a long time. So hope you enjoyed that. Maybe doing some writing on this game as well. So stay tuned to Lacrosse Culture Daily. And that was another NCAA Lacrosse Game Breakdown.